Welcome to this episode of Whistle the Feast. My name is Jason Jaspersen. We're recording here on the campus of Bethany Lutheran College, and today we have Andrew Judkins joining us to have an impromptu conversation. We haven't prepared for this.
I don't know.
And I think that's delightful. But in another way, we've had this conversation a few times.
That's true.
Andrew is a painter from Mankato. He is a landscape painter, and recently he's sitting here because he came to pick up his paintings from the exhibition that was in the Yilvasaker Fine Arts Center gallery. And we had a really nice reception and conversation with Andrew at his opening reception. Students were really engaged, I would say, in some cases giddy about his paintings, and I've been hearing that around campus too. The phenomenon that's really striking people is the way that proximity affects the way that the paintings read. So I think what I would like to do is try to ease us into a conversation about how the paintings come to be, what it means to be a painter, motives and realities of it. And, beyond that, I think we're going to find our way.
Sure.
So how about you give us a little background about how you came to be a painter and fill in the origin story up till the present day?
Sure. I guess to go way back to the dinosaur days, my grandma, in her older years, picked up being an artist. She didn't think she could do it most of her life, and she was busy raising a family. And then when she was retirement age, she started to explore taking classes and becoming an artist herself instead of just kind of being interested in it and thinking it wasn't something she could handle. And then she got super into it, even into her 90s, and tried all sorts of different things. She loved pastels, colored pencils, but she also took several classes in Chinese painting. And so she sort of created art in the family. And then my mom is an artist as well, so I grew up surrounded by her art and seeing her do art all the time, and art supplies just around all the time. And sometimes just seeing art supplies and color and these objects are supposed to be used for art, even if you only know vaguely how, can be really exciting to your brain as a child. And so I never felt like it was strange or weird to be an artist or that I couldn't do it. That's something my grandma really had to sort of a mountain she had to climb, is that idea of being intimidated and feeling like I can't do this, or this is too hard, or this is not me. That's not something I had to deal with. She had to sort of build it out of scratch, out of nowhere, but I was just born into that being a normal thing. So for me to imagine myself as an artist was really easy.
That's a really interesting comment. I've been thinking about how generations kind of navigate the social stigma or the feeling of whether or not being an artist is an acceptable path. Mm-hmm. And now you're saying your grandmother and then your mother have essentially done that sod busting, and you're benefiting from that.
Yes, very much. And with my grandma, it wasn't so much whether it was like a proper thing to do or something worth pursuing or things like that. She never thought about it as something that you would do as a career or anything. But she was really intimidated by how hard the process of learning is and accepting yourself as an artist, and that intimidation of understanding that other people will accept you as an artist too, and getting over the hump. And and accepting that they will if you work hard and you're passionate about it. And so those are the kind of things I think she struggled with when she talked to me about it, more than sort of a stigma or anything like that.
It was an internal friction.
Yes, a lot of people have that with art because there's sort of a magic quality to it, and it's not easy to do good art. And if you're not surrounded by it, not familiar with it, and don't know anything about it and how it works, it can just seem very intimidating. And it's not something people feel very comfortable failing at. There's some things that people are really able to try and just fall on their face and be okay with. But for some reason, people get very self-conscious about art and other self-expression things and being bad at them. And they don't think it's okay to go through that phase where they're bad, and have faith that they will get better and they can accept themselves as an artist the whole time. So I think it was things like that that my grandma struggled with a lot. She has kind of a similar personality than me, that I have, in that she's, easily intimidated and doesn't always have a big ego, and is, just a modest personality. And so it was hard for her to get that confidence. But eventually she really accepted that she was an artist and tried a lot of different things, a lot of varied things, which I was really impressed by.
So do you continue to have some of the objects that she's made?
Yes, I have a few of her works, and one of them is a pastel she did way before I was born, and it's pine trees, like a grove of them in Michigan that she saw on vacation, and it's just has a more magical quality to me. I kind of feel like a child lost in a slightly scary forest when I see it, and it's very different from her work. It's kind of, she had like grandma kind of interests in her work, sort of, and she liked flowers and pastel kind of colors that were soft and nice. And so this was a different kind of painting for her, because it was pretty dark and shadowy forest, a lot of, olive greens, and sort of a little different side than you see from her work usually. And so I really like that one a lot. And I have a few of her Chinese paintings, which helped inspire me a lot when I tried some Chinese painting myself.
So let's jump to the next generation. Can you talk about your mother's creative work?
Sure. She is very into multimedia and trying a lot of different things and sort of mixing medias together to create work. When I was a kid, she was doing works that primarily centered around rocks, and the rocks were from the Lake Superior area, and they were done realistically, life-size, in colored pencil. But then she would make these surreal kind of worlds that the rocks were in, and that tended to be out of only black ink with a lot of really tiny stippling, and there were a lot of times architectural features like pillars and things. And so it's kind of like these surreal stages for the realistic rocks.
I just, to pause there, I remember her show at the Ilvasaker Fine Arts Center when I was a student at Bethany.
Really?
And it really struck me that she basically invented her medium. She described putting the paper on like on a frying pan on the stovetop and doing a little bit of like crayon melting.
Yes. When I was a child, that was the work I just described. And later, she continued to do the rocks, but she moved on to using crayons. And so that's where she would use a hot plate that she got at a garage sale, and it would heat it up just the right amount to melt the crayons, so it was just really workable, and you could get different effects with it. And so I had some sort of Bristol board. I think she cuts into the rock shapes, or I think actually she draws the rocks and then cuts them out maybe, but all the rocks are cut out separately, and then she, I think, uses some sort of matte medium to stick them on to sort of a background Bristol board now. So she moved on from the colored pencils and more traditional media for fine artists to the crayons. And she actually, it's kind of funny, I'm just really into paint, pigment, colors, and like light fastness and all this nerdy stuff about art supplies. And she did this series of, like, she called it Ordinary Objects, and it was done with crayon. And it was like a sink, faucet, hammer, just really ordinary objects. And she would kind of use free coloring and line work and things like that, flowing line work, and just kind of play around with the shapes of these things you see every day with this series. And there's a lot of bright colors in them and stuff. And over the years, they've faded a lot because she just uses normal Crayola crayons. Now, when she's using them for the rocks, they tend to be pretty light, fast browns and things like that. That even in crayons are light, fast. But then, like, a lot of the bright colors that she used for this Ordinary Object series do not last. And so they've been changed. Those works have been changing over the years and are much more subtle than they used to be. And she doesn't seem to mind. And I'm all like, oh,
interesting, different priorities
about it. Yeah, she just accepts that she's using a not fine artist material, and then it might change and fade over time. Although her rocks have been quite durable, I think that, earthy end of the spectrum, it maybe is more durable in the crayons. But she just loves the unconventionalness of that media.
Yeah, and that's what struck me as a student. The work was exquisite. I remember looking at it, and actually, now that I think about it, having a similar phenomenon happening in my eyes that happens when I look at your paintings. That there's something very convincing. I feel convinced by the optical effect. But the thing that really struck me was how bold she was, how sort of flippant she seemed to be about conventions. It was this attitude that would allow her to use child's tools, a hot plate, and cut these things, and then in the same piece be very meticulous about the value, about the shading of the rocks to give an illusionistic sort of light source, and then assemble them as if she's sort of stacking them. And gravity seems to be, hinted at the same way light is hinted at. It was just like a one of a kind process. She accumulated processes, put them together in a way that seemed to me to be the only time this happened in history.
She'd like to think that. I think that's something she really enjoys about her work, is mixing processes of the media and coming up with something unique. And that's very different from me. I just want to use a really good classic medium and make it my own, so that people will be able to recognize my work just by looking at it. And I want to make it unique in the way I handle it, rather than sort of the methods I invent or the unusual media I bring together or something like that. So we come at that aspect of art at a very different angle. And it's fun. It's not like I think my way is better or her way is better or worse. It's just fun to have those contrasts and those different ways of viewing things. It really opens your mind to new possibilities and appreciations.
Well, the realm of art, the field of art, I think, is an interesting and unique playground where that's all possible. That's all in bounds to think in very sort of traditional conservation-like ways, and within the same realm think in very sort of inventive, try things out kind of ways. One more question. I've been admiring your mother's work for now 3 decades, I think.
Wow.
And I remember gunpowder being a medium for her.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just briefly describe how that worked?
Yes. She discovered it because her dad, my grandpa, would go around and do shooting competitions, and was kind of into guns and stuff. So he would just store all this gunpowder around, and it was all these different types, and I don't know much about it, but he just had a big store of it. And she was in college, I think, at the time that she thought of this idea of, she had seen it used and been taught about it a little bit, and she thought, well, that could burn an interesting texture into a work of art. And so she started doing some tests and trying.
Somebody taught her how to use it as an art medium?
No, she just taught how it works, with guns, and that it's, flammable, and that there's different strengths of it or whatever for different kinds of guns. And I don't know anything about it myself, so I'm kind of just making up sort of all the factors that she probably was taught about, sort of in the traditional use of the gunpowder that I have no idea about, because I'm not into that stuff at all. So she had a little bit of background as to like thinking about, well, if I'm going to use it to burn an image onto a paper or a canvas, this one could produce a dark, and this one might be light and subtle, and I've seen her do it, and some of the gunpowders have a very different texture. Like there's some that are like long little shapes like tiny Mike and Ikes.
Like a pill shape?
Yeah, and they just burn a dark version of that shape right onto the paper. Huh. Really dark. And some of them are much more fine powder, and they make just kind of it's sort of a ochre kind of color that has just a slight sandy look to it. It's very fine texture and a pretty light value, and lots of stuff in between. So I think she started she was doing kind of abstract paintings at the time in college, and they were acrylic, and so she was able to burn some texture in with the gunpowder, like on top of stuff she had painted. But eventually she moved on to exploring only using the gunpowder, and she would get like a thick, you can't do it on like thin paper, so it's like a Bristol board or something that she would do her burns on, and she'd go out in the garage and make like a makeshift studio out there with a whole bunch of the gunpowders, and lay them out and swirl images, sort of like drawing with sand, but then you light it on fire, and it makes kind of an etching of burn into the paper.
Mm. So she would just kind of have a lighter on one end, and it would be a chain reaction that would travel across?
Yep, kind of like one of those long lighters for lighting your grill or something.
Mm. Okay. What I detect there is that she found that art medium again through a generation.
Mm-hmm. Something
that was important to her father.
Yeah, something she was around a lot because of what was important to her.
And it was available.
Mm-hmm. Lots of
this
it.
Was available. Mm-hmm. So she saw the potential.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as you started, you said going back to the dinosaur age.
Mm-hmm.
And we've been progressively moving up a timeline. Let's talk about you and how you think you became an artist.
Well, I think that it was always something that was on my mind because of what I just talked about, and it was also something I just had a extra ability at as a child, even. And it was a way for me when I was in school to get praise and attention, which I normally didn't get because I was very, very shy. And I was a very slow learner. And so I didn't necessarily do well at anything else. I was even stuff that, I knew how to do or I eventually mastered. I was tentative to an excess, and also just slow in mastering compared to other people because of my learning style. And so with art, that gave me something I instantly could be ahead of everyone on and get people paying attention to me, and maybe they would talk to me for once and show some interest in saying something to me, and I wouldn't feel so lonely. So I started being interested because it sort of made me feel good about myself and like I was doing something that I was meant to do, even from a very young age. And so that got me working and feeling like my identity was an artist.
Give us a sense of what age you're talking about.
Oh, grade school. I mean, even from kindergarten age, I think I showed more of a visual arts ability than the average child. But it was really noticeable to teachers, fourth grade around that time. And other students started noticing as well around that time and would look at, one of my drawings and they'd see a lot more going on in them, detail-wise and color-wise and what they were used to, and get kind of curious and just sort of start asking me about what I was doing a little bit.
So consider where we are right now. Here's me wanting to talk to you because of the art that you make, right? Like that story just like expanded in a fractal way. So those were the early days of Andrew as an artist. We've got some timeline yet to fill in to bring us up to us sitting here in this studio. Tell us more.
Okay. It's hard to know where to start.
Can you take us into, say, high school?
Well, in high school, by that time, I really felt like, at very least, I wanted to go to college and I wanted to explore art more at that level. And I, would get these little glimpses of, what was going on the campus of places I saw, like MSU, and just like it seemed like a dream world where it was like this commune of art making almost in this big, huge building, and you would just see all this amazing art on the walls everywhere, and just imagine that, you could be that good someday as this art. And so in high school, I was thinking about that as what I wanted to do in a direction I wanted to go. And I just took as many art classes as I could at that time to explore my abilities, and because I loved it. And I wanted to build up, get ready for college and be a really good artist at the college level. So then I ended up majoring in studio art at Gustavus Adolphus College, and that was really a fun experience of trying a lot of different things and working on my skills and meeting a lot of cool student artists. And it was also a school that wasn't so big that it was terribly overwhelming for me. So it allowed me to feel comfortable and not overwhelmed by too much coming in. And there's something to be said for that when you're trying to find yourself as an artist. So I went to school there in a studio art major, and then eventually I decided I wanted to really push my art as far as I could. And to me, the best way to do that was to go to grad school in my head as a young man. And so I tried really hard to get into grad school and eventually got into the Savannah College of Art and Design and went there for 3 years and majored in painting.
For our listeners, the Savannah College of Art and Design is a prestigious and desirable American grad school or undergrad school for specifically for all kinds of creative activity. Yeah,
it's a very strange school. It's kind of fun to talk a little about because it was founded relatively recently, I think in like 1979. And instead of building a campus, they have a big historic preservation and architecture kind of program. So they used that program they were building to help build their campuses they started in. So they would buy up buildings of all different types. Some of them were old, pretty buildings. Some of them were new, kind of not very exciting buildings. And they would remodel them for purposes of making a de facto campus kind of spread around the downtown. And so it's a cool place to go to school because the campus is just integrated so much in the downtown, which is, it's a historic town. It's a really cool, pretty area. And you get to have all, classes in all these different weird, cool buildings with different architectural styles. And kind of see also what they did, including the students, to repurpose the different buildings. Like one of them that was really like they did a lot was downtown. The library is made of an old department store, and they really they made it like this weird modern library, artsy kind of library, and it's very different from the building they were left with to start with. Others, their goal is to kind of keep the building as close to the way it was originally, and do a lot of the historic preservation side of their program on the building. And so that's the campus. And then as a program, you have access to a lot of different creative fields. And so if you're interested in multimedia or something, you can talk to a lot of different people that are into different things. And also, specifically, the grad program is very large. Most grad programs aren't very big. And this one was an entire floor in the painting building. The second floor was all painting studios for grad students. I don't remember now, so long ago, but it must have been 30 students at a time on average that had studios and were currently in the grad program. And what comes along with that is a lot of times you'll go to a grad school and it'll kind of have an ideology a bit, because it's small, and people who want those kinds of professors and that kind of school will go there. So they'll be like, this is kind of an abstract expressionist school. This is kind of a figurative school. This is kind of a, I don't know, this or that school. And so you kind of go there to do something that you're already expecting, maybe. Whereas with Savannah College of Art and Design, the grad program is so large that there's a lot of professors, and they have a lot of different interests in different kinds of painting. So there's some that are very up on contemporary stuff, cutting edge sort of aesthetics that are trendy. There's others that are very traditional, figurative, still life landscape painters. And another thing I found really great about the program was they have a very strong illustration program. And I didn't know this before I went to school, I found that the illustration program contained great formal skills. So people that came out of that program were just astonishing at formal aspects of art. And a lot of them actually came into the painting program after being undergrads at the school in illustration. And so I learned a ton from the people that had experience in illustration.
From the students?
Yes.
Yeah.
And in general, I learned a lot from the students going there, because there's 30 studios going, all different styles and approaches, and people that came from different backgrounds. Some came from illustration, some didn't even major in art, were from far away. Some were from right around the south down there in Savannah, Georgia area. And they all just had different backgrounds and types of work they wanted to do. And I could just go in and kind of do what we're doing now, interview them almost about their work and ask them questions about what I saw. And that's just such a great way to learn about art. It's sort of casual and low stakes compared to trying to please professors, but a great learning method of its own.
Mm-hmm. Did that community feel right? Good for you?
Yeah, it worked for me. I don't have anything to compare it to, because I didn't ever go to another grad school that was a little more traditional, but I liked it a lot because I like to try different things, and so it gave me a chance to sort of experiment for a while and try things I was seeing, little bits of around me, and seeing how they fit. And then sort of zeroing in slowly on what I really wanted to do, and having some time to do that and feeling comfortable doing that, and having the professors around that were varied enough to sort of accept that kind of self-exploration and finding yourself process. And so I felt really comfortable with that, and just the variety that was always around me. It's still, a difficult process of jumping through hoops and getting the professors to believe in you and things like that. But there was that open-mindedness and the ability to explore and try different things. And I think that strengthened my work to be able to have that instead of just saying my best guess is landscape painting of around this type, and I'm just going to start right in without doing any exploration or trying any other influences or things that are around me, and just battening down the hatches right away on one little thing. I think being able to be in a grad program and be a little more searching for a little while ultimately made my work more rich.
So you're starting to move into the idea of the attitude that you had in grad school and how it affects where you are now. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about the kind of work that you were making in grad school?
Sure.
I think you just started that.
I started doing like really crazy stuff. At first, like I did a painting of Abraham Lincoln. It just was these crazy colors for one class. And I was trying to bring as many like clashing complementary colors together in one painting as I could. And in my mind, that was kind of a symbolism of what our country was going through under Abraham Lincoln and all the conflict and stuff. And I did this series of paintings that was like college antics, or as like figurative stuff, sort of treated on a big epic scale. But it was like one of them I can remember was like a picture of a drunk guy passed out and people were drawing a tuxedo on him as a prank. And I just was in an environment around a lot of college students because they were the floor below me, and I talked to them a lot. And so it was a weird subject I wanted to try. And so I did a series of those. But pretty quickly I started easing into landscape painting. But I felt a lot of pressure to be kind of contemporary in some way and sort of ideological in an obvious way in my work. So the thing I invented early on was I did kind of a grungy looking aesthetic, and the landscapes I did were sort of where man meets a wild area. So like an example would be like if you've ever been to a ravine where the power lines cut through and they have to like cut all the trees down and make this gouge, and you can see the sort of bare shape of the valley. I did a painting like of that sort of thing, and I did a painting of a place that had a tornado, and a whole bunch of Dairy Queen spoons got just thrown out all over the landscape. So there was all these red spoons everywhere, and just like rotting, kind of forgotten, gross industrial stuff in kind of wild edges and things like that. And it's sort of this battle between man and nature that I was trying to do, and the aesthetic wasn't very pleasant. And I did that for a while, and I didn't feel like it was completely successful aesthetically, maybe. But I also just did not feel like my heart was in it, and I started doing more works where there was no sign of people, and then getting more into works that I found inspiring or beautiful in places that were special to me. And those places always tended to be tucked away, and there wasn't really signs of people, and they were very placid and emotional places for me, where I felt like I was in a different world. And I started painting those, and they were all from back home. There's pretty areas around Savannah. They have a kind of these big marshes and swampy areas. It's called the Low Country, and really cool plants like live oaks where the branches almost touch the ground, a lot of cool palm trees and palmettos and stuff. But I just didn't feel a connection to that nature. So I would enjoy it, and we'd go out and paint it in classes sometimes. But for my body work down there, I continued to run back to Minnesota and get subjects over the summer and then paint them all year in school and stick with painting what really was in my heart.
Okay, so let's jump to the body of work that we just had in the gallery.
Okay.
And, broadly speaking, I think most people who saw your work would just peg you as a landscape painter. Mm-hmm. So why? After the things that you just described, I wish you would just describe artwork after artwork, because it's just such a vivid image in my mind of the different series that you were working on.
Mm-hmm.
So what led you to the place that you're at?
Well, it's about love and passion and following that to say what you want to say, I guess. Like when I was talking about the work where I was doing kind of the ugly border between man and nature, I was trying to sort of say something with that work and force saying something. But I learned over time that it was best to follow your heart, and then your heart will be saying something with your work. So a lot of the messages I was interested in saying with the man versus nature work come up in people's minds when they see my work now, even though I'm not pressing that theme at all. I just am painting things that I love, things that make my heart feel happy. And I don't want to sound too corny about it. It's not like I'm out there frolicking in nature and painting just only beautiful things. I mean, I think people will come to my shows and generally call it beautiful work and call the locations beautiful. But to me, more than just simply nature is beautiful and I'm out there frolicking and looking at some pretty flowery thing, it's about nature as a place where I feel things I don't feel anywhere else. And I want to capture those special feelings and put them onto the canvas. As I'm also making a realistic interpretation of an area, so people will be able to recognize what they're seeing if they go to that location someday themselves, and being, loyal to the actual location and seeing it almost like a friend. And if you were painting a portrait of a friend, you might be Francis Bacon or something and want to purposely do something that's not flattering. But normally, you'd want to say, I'm going to do a portrait of my friend. I want people to kind of see their personality when they see the portrait. I want it to be a good likeness so it's not insulting. And that's sort of how I feel about my locations I love so much and I paint, is that I want people to see them accurately in a good light, and their personality, I want that to come through in the painting. So there's like an emotional aspect where it's like I'm trying to convey what I'm feeling and how much emotion and different human experience things can be expressed through landscape. And I'm also just trying to make a good facsimile for the experience of the location that's loyal to it and does it honor.
Yeah, I hear a reverence. I hear you said honor.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are really interesting concepts for people to think about in terms of an image of a place.
And I do think I'm successful in getting that across to most of the viewers. And I think that helps get them thinking in a different way about what they see around them in landscape. Maybe look at just, the roadside or a hike, and what they're seeing when they're on a hike out in nature itself in a different way, from just like their commute to going out to a park. They're going to maybe think a little more about what they're seeing and look at it a little differently after seeing my paintings, and that, for lack of a better word, that sort of reverence that they kind of can sense from them.
Mm. Yeah, I opened this conversation talking about the sort of flutter of sort of giddy activity about your paintings in the gallery. Mm-hmm. You just kind of put words on it. There's some way to talk about it that maybe our community, our campus community, didn't quite have the vocabulary for it yet. Mm-hmm. But the desired effect was happening. Some sort of an appreciation, some sort of, you use the word shimmer in the gallery, mm-hmm. in the reception. The work is communicating though we're not necessarily reading words.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's an important realization for our listeners. I think that's obvious to you.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, we're used to this kind of thinking.
Yeah, well, we are, but it's something you want to do as an artist is go beyond words and what is describable. So when someone doesn't really know how to put the experience of seeing your work into words, I look at that as more of a flattering thing than a negative, like, oh, they don't know enough about art, or they're not articulate, or I confused them with my work, I did a bad job, or things like that. No, I see it as a very positive thing, like this is why we're doing visual art. You can't do everything with words. You can't always describe everything. I mean, I love trying to describe things well. I think I'm very articulate. I'm a writer, so I have a lot of practice at trying to put things into words, but I love working in visual art because it's not words and it goes beyond words, not just because it's not your media. I mean, there aren't words in the work. It's not about words, but it's like you're touching on emotions or meanings or realizations in people's minds that would not come from words. You are reaching different things than words reach, and so that's a really strong purpose for visual art to be out there that I don't think people readily realize. You know, they can come into a show and experience it and have that joy and that mystery come to them naturally because it's a natural human thing to happen, and you don't need any education or any perspective for it just to wash over you. But I think sometimes people maybe downplay or don't realize the importance of visual art because they don't understand there's that area of wordlessness that is reached with visual art, and that's an important place for humanity to be sometimes.
You know, I've been reading a paper recently that talks about the untranslatability of each medium, even from an artistic medium to another, say, nonverbal artistic medium. There's a real reason why dance exists and why theater exists and music exists and painting exists and sculpture exists. Each of them do the thing that they do in ways that nothing else can do.
Definitely.
We can approximate that, and oftentimes we default to the use of language to try to describe all of these things, but language should not be thought of as adequate.
Mm-hmm.
I found that very interesting.
It is interesting, and that's kind of how I, to a degree, think of photography. I think of photography as sort of something that describes things visually, but it has limitations. Sort of like if you're trying to describe something with words, you're not going to be able to describe it so well that if someone sees it, it's the exact same experience as just looking at it. And that's kind of a way I look at like painting versus photography, is that there's things that the photograph communication-wise is going to distort or miss that the painting can fill in a way that the photography medium just doesn't. It's not as big of a gap as maybe all visual art versus trying to describe things with words, but you know, I notice gaps like that sometimes that maybe people who haven't studied visual art as much don't, and they sort of think something like photography is the gospel truth all the time, and it's very documentary, and you have to always think of that as the standard. A lot of people think like that because we live in a world that's completely surrounded by photos and screens and pictures that are made through mechanical means all the time. And they're not thinking in terms of truth that paintings and other handmade visual art mediums can reach that the photography can't.
So, I think what you're advocating is just an awareness that any image that we see has some sort of mediation built into it, whether that's a painting that you make or an image that a camera makes. It's been made by somebody other than the final viewer or some other process, and then it's delivered to you for your regard through some sort of a context. There's something in between you and the thing. So in the case of your landscape paintings, you created the image, and you had photographs, or you had first-hand experience, and you sort of filtered it. You're the mediator, and you're making choices along the way, and then these things are on the wall, and we look at the things based on the choices that you made that are sometimes detectable, sometimes undetectable to us. And that happens in the case of any other device, too. The device makes choices, or the person operating the device makes choices, the camera or the phone, or color grading. Things get altered, and those are all choices that are made prior to us digesting them.
Yeah, I mean, in a nutshell, a lot of people will just view photography as something that can be artistic, but it's just like, as a media, it's just the truth. Like, you're working with the truth, and you're capturing the truth, and then it's how you frame it, or how you light it, or the subjects you choose, or whatever. And that's just not true. It's camera is an electronic mechanical eye, and it does not work the same as the human eye. So it sees things differently inherently. And so, I bring that difference up because it's something I'm always thinking about as an artist, because I am trying to bring these images to life, and I need tools. And one of my tools is I use photos. So I'm always in painting places I've been and I'm familiar with. But then I'm coming back in the studio. I need help. I don't have a great visual memory, and so I have these photos to work from. And I have to be very aware of the limitations, the way those photos are manipulating reality that's different from the eye, and sort of, things that the photography is not great at. Like when I filter an image through myself, through painting, I can really do things. It's more plastic than photography. I can do things that are expressive.
I think you have to define plastic for our listeners.
Sure.
It's familiar to you and me, but I think it means something else to most of the world.
Think of it as like
malleable,
taffy, like something stretchable. So
yeah,
it's very easy to manipulate in things you want to do as far as expressive characteristics, or even really simple practical things like changing the composition, spread, and proportions slightly to the way you think would make the work better emotionally, or create more depth, or make it more accurate to the way you think the eye sees it as opposed to the way the camera picks it up, things like that. So it's just that flexibility. Now, I mean, there's a lot of ways you can manipulate a photo, but it's kind of, those are falling back on mechanical means and tools that are built into things like software and things like that. And when you're just mixing around goo on a canvas, that's the ultimate in like what we're trying to define as plastic, that taffy kind of maneuverability for all purposes of the image. It's just kind of a different level of that sort of freedom and flexibility and manipulation.
Speaking of which, like pushing around goo on a canvas might be the most enjoyable activity. Like
it's fun.
People who haven't done it before, like there is something you're missing. There's something just delightful about it.
It is. It's like a form of play, and a lot of people, like when they see my work, they see a joy in it right away. And I think, that comes from a lot of things, but a big part of it is just seeing, they can see immediately, even if they're not trained in art at all, how much I am enjoying the experience of playing around with the colored goo on the canvas. Mm-hmm. And they can just instinctively sense that.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the work and that phenomenon, like the sense that people get from the work. Mm-hmm. I experienced this, and I heard many others report that they experience a very different painting based on their proximity, mm-hmm. a different kind of relationship with the painting. Mm-hmm. So here's the phenomenon as I see it. I'll try to use words mm-hmm. to explain a different medium here.
Sure.
What happens is people walked into the gallery and they start from a distance. They regard the paintings from across the room, mm-hmm. and there is a stunning presence to your paintings. From a distance, they glow. There is a shimmer. There's some presence that you achieve in various ways, light and color and composition. And then, inevitably a person approaches one, and I would say at about 6 feet away, optically, like if you're paying attention, if you're sort of watching it, if your eyes are open and your attention is on as you approach the painting, mm-hmm. at about 6 feet away, it starts to change. It starts mm-hmm. to transform. I would say it begins to disintegrate a bit. Mm-hmm. And then I'd say at about 3 feet, you start to detect marks, which I've called your penmanship. Mm-hmm. There's a kind of a dancing mark, a calligraphy that you seem to have a great freedom, and you make different decisions in different zones. That all of this becomes so obvious to the viewer at 3 feet away, so very there. Mm-hmm. When 10 feet away, it just wasn't. Mm-hmm. It just gels into this shimmering image of nature. Mm-hmm. That's the phenomenon that I experienced, and that many others reported they experienced.
Yes, and that's a phenomenon you can technically experience with any realist painting. You can always find a way to get close enough so that it breaks down and you're seeing how it's made, and it's fun to see that behind the curtain sort of element. And it's also just a beautiful place to be, sort of in an abstract way in itself. What I try to do with my work is make a little bigger area where you can experience that close-up fun part of it and have things dissolve into a playful, the calligraphy zone, and also see some colors you don't expect, textures, and sort of a dance in paint. And I want that to be a big chunk of what people see, so I want something that does fall apart when you step close, like 6-7 feet away. I think a lot of painters are a little scared to do that. They're scared to paint and show behind the curtain that much, whereas for me it's really important and exciting part of it. I forget terminology, and so I forgot this during our talk we had for the show, but my professor had a term. I don't know if he coined it or if he knew it from art history or something, but he called what we're talking about threshold shift, where there's this shift in the threshold of the painting, I guess.
Well, that's immediate. That immediately describes it.
Yeah, and I just forgot.
It's a great word.
It's a cool term, but I always forget words, and so I forgot that. But yeah, that's what he called it, and he was calling attention to that aspect when I was in grad school. So since then, when I was in grad school to now, I've been very conscious of that aspect of painting. And, there's certain painters that I looked at that sort of were inspirational. Franz Hals is one from, the time of Rembrandt in the 1600s in Holland area. He was a portrait painter and just has this wet on wet, almost hatching kind of style of mark making that falls apart close, sooner when you're approaching it than most painters of that era, and gives his subjects just an energy and a personality. So when I first started kind of getting into the threshold shift stuff in grad school, that was a painter I looked at a lot. I was looking at a lot of landscape stuff and not seeing necessarily the things I wanted to see. I mean, I was seeing the calligraphy and guys like Van Gogh, but his work doesn't come together as a full realism quite like I wanted to do. So I kind of turned to someone who's doing portraits for a little bit of inspiration for that kind of mark making.
So when I teach art history, we talk about that. We become aware of now threshold shift, is in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
The way I describe it, I talk about the kind of posture that you can imagine the artist having with regard to their work.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody like Franz Hals, we call the salad of brushwork.
Mm-hmm.
There's this sort of tossed miracle that you can see that it's sort of the strokes sort of like float in space and orbit each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that feels like a very physical sort of stance toward the canvas. John Singer Sargent talked about fencing with the canvas.
Mm-hmm.
Diego Velázquez has this kind of salad of brushwork.
Mm-hmm.
But if you contrast that with somebody like Hans Holbein,
mm-hmm.
we talk about him in terms of being like a jeweler with sort of a monocle over his eye, and he's sort of hunched over his work, and making tiny, tiny little marks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what I'm leading to is it feels to me like you're in the salad of brushwork school.
Mm-hmm.
Does it hold true that when you paint, you're standing and you're moving back and forth, and sort of there's a physical sort of relationship with the easel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go back a little bit for a second from that question, because I wanted to mention one thing. Mm-hmm. When I was in school and younger and more judgmental, people like Holbein or Jan van Eyck and those old smooth painters without the salad thing at all that you're talking about. I had a reverence for their ability and their realism and the jewel-like qualities they created in their paintings, but that just seemed so boring and lame to me and uptight. Mm. And then I had to take this class called Materials and Techniques, and the whole class was just doing a copy of a Jan van Eyck painting, or part of one. I did the Man in Red Turban. And in doing that process, I discovered that on a micro level, it's very similar to the salad kind of effect, except maybe I call it more of a soup, because it's not quite the expressive calligraphy, but you're making a soup of these tiny little brush strokes and colors that are actually quite interesting. And to create a really great copy of that kind of work, you have to go beyond just the boring color choices and simple shading, and do those kinds of interesting brushstrokes and color choices that are more subtle but very small. And so I realized that the sort of thing I'm doing kind of like in the Sargent fencing way, in a daring and obvious way, all painters are doing. And so when you focus in really close, like Jan van Eyck would do. It's just smaller and different, but it's still, we're brothers, and that's there's a really beautiful shimmer to that work too in its own way. So I got a new appreciation for all painting, kind of including that kind of element and just how it works, and that I'm not outside of what they're doing really.
Yeah,
Right,
you're just at a different threshold shift.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, and so. So what was that question now? Go back to, yes, about stepping back.
Let's call it an athletic painting practice.
I step back a lot, and I think just as important as stepping back a lot in processes, I take tons of breaks. There's like small 5-10 minute breaks while I'm painting to refresh my eye totally. I don't step back maybe as much as you would expect. Like if someone who hasn't been doing this for years were to try to do what I'm doing or didn't have a natural knack for it like I do, they would have to just obsessively step back so much. And I don't have to as much as you would think maybe, but it's still part of the process. Yes, I will get to a point where I'm like, time to step back. And I paint in a basement. And so there's this concrete floor, and there's this spot where the concrete's different. That's about 7 feet. So that's kind of my spot to check if I'm, doing the threshold shift approximately right. And it varies with paintings, and scale you're working, So sometimes I'll have like a 36 by 48 and it'll be further back. And sometimes I'll have like a, 24 by 30 painting. It's a little smaller, and maybe I'll invite the realistic part to be a little closer. Or sometimes, a subject will determine that. So I'll have a painting two paintings that are the same size, but one I will require the viewer to be further back from for things to really fall together, just because that feels right for that painting and that subject, and emotionally or whatever. So there's definitely leeway, but it's sort of like that concrete spot on my floor that's sort of the ground rule, middle spot where this is where it should start feeling realistic. Start not thinking so much about the colors and brushstroke and textures, and start thinking more about being immersed in a place. And then there's a spot that's about twice that far that I step back a lot to sort of gauge the painting from a longer distance.
So you answered your question kind of in terms of optics. Mm-hmm. You talked about refreshing your eyes. You talked about getting your eyes to a certain distance, and sometimes farther, sometimes closer, depending on the scale. I find the walking away completely to refresh your eye a really interesting comment. Mm-hmm. It sounds like a chef cleansing the palate, like start fresh.
Well, I think it's good for any artist to do that maybe a little more frequently than they like. And I think I have ADHD, and so my instinct is to step back more than the average person, I think, just because I feel like this, I don't know, like itch to do it and mentally. And so I just sort of, I gotta step back and sort of it's almost agitated. Like I'm very calm and meditative while I'm painting, but I get these sort of mini agitations where I just need to get away. And I think it's part of just, the way my brain is put together. And just,
well, now that you put that in words, that sounds familiar.
Yeah.
I experienced that too, and I've never talked about it with anybody.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting, but it's just, I don't know, like a happy accident that's the way my brain works, I think, for the type of work I do,
Yeah.
But
Right. Pretty convenient.
Mm-hmm. But, in terms of what you were saying optically, taking, not just stepping further away and looking, but not looking at the work for a while and doing something maybe go watch TV for a second, or just something that totally gets your brain off the painting. Read, go outside and look for a bird, watch TV for a second.
You're cleansing your attention.
Yes, and totally cleansing your brain and what you're focusing on completely, so that there's not like a ghost image that you're mulling over in your head.
Yeah, like
while
a screen,
you're taking
like a
break.
screensaver.
Yeah, so get that out of there. So then that functions when you come back. I think any visual artist, any painter could use that. It's a useful thing to cleanse and come back, because you're just seeing mistakes, things you want to change, things you were numb to. That's a big thing. You're visually numbing yourself by staring at something so much, and you just have to take that into consideration. And the best way to take that into consideration is to get away from it and come back, so you're not numb and see those things that you were missing. So in the style that I'm painting in, where there's that threshold shift, and I'm also trying to create depth. So the threshold shift isn't the same across the whole canvas. So further back stuff closer to the sky will not require you to be as far from the painting. And there's stuff that's ridiculously bold sometimes in my foregrounds, as far as the thickness of the paint, the boldness of the colors, the lack of mixing, the shape of the brush strokes, things like that are just almost silly looking close up. And that's in part because it's fun to include something like that in the painting, but a big part of it is to create depth and to create that feeling of closeness when you step back of the elements in the front of the painting. So you're juggling. It's like a juggling act of all these elements, and by stepping away, you're looking at what's not working, what I need to adjust here and there, because it's not just a flat one threshold shift per painting that you're aiming for. There's different parts of the painting that need to have different levels of detail that create a sense of depth, and that things are close. It's almost like I have a stereoscope, which is this old thing that they had in the 1800s, where they would take photos and with two cameras, and it would mimic the eye seeing things at slightly different angles.
Yeah, I grew up on Viewmasters.
Yes, and it's like that. And so when you actually like analyze what you're looking at and like compare the two images, you'll see that in the foreground you're way off. In the background they're almost exactly the same. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with painting. Like I'm just making these like crazy brush strokes up front that almost are like your eyes see.
Maybe they're agitated.
Like they're off a little bit, especially when you're close. And it's a little bit like that, although it's more optically how your eyes work in connection with your brain. And I'm not exactly doing that with my painting, but it's sort of related to that, in that there's sort of this seemingly carelessness to what's close to make it seem it's right in front of you and you're looking beyond it. So that's something that I'm working at balancing all the time, and looking at that kind of space that's just bold and ridiculous, and seeing if it's coming forward enough, seeing if the middle ground is where the eye is settling, looking into the background and seeing if that's falling back. And it's different in every painting. Sometimes I want someone to be focusing on the horizon. Sometimes I want someone to be looking at a big log that's pretty close. Sometimes I want people to be seeing the whole thing more. And so I try to make it a little flatter and a little bit more encompassing, so they're just taking it all in, just based on the sort of subject I'm working with. So it's very complicated to bring it all together, and there's a lot of things you're juggling, a lot of judgments you're making to get all the elements right and all the spots in the painting right. So it's just a huge advantage to be able to erase your brain and come back and look at it, in order to see the mistakes or the things that aren't progressing the way you want to in the juggling act.
Can you juggle?
No, not at all.
Maybe I'll teach you. It's one of the greatest things I learned here as a student at Bethany Lutheran College.
I always thought it was cool, but I never had the patience to sit down and make myself learn.
Well, it's not too late.
I might be good at it. I worked stocking groceries. for a while, and it was the weirdest thing because I would drop things all the time and catch them just automatically. Like I was training my brain without thinking about it to catch stuff. And it's like years later, I still am just like weird at like catching stuff that I drop or falls in front of me. Yeah. And so I think, well, maybe I could use that for juggling something.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Around to it, so.
Like your peripheral vision just sort of takes care of it.
It's weird, and I didn't have that skill before I worked that job at all. I just everything would fall to the ground.
You got more than a paycheck.
I guess so.
You got a skill out of it.
I still would rather have not done it.
Well,
but that's one positive thing I brought from it.
You never know. You never know what's happening. Right. I think. I don't know if you can hear yourself outside of when you're talking, but me listening right now, I can tell that this is an incredibly valuable conversation to have recorded.
Oh, good.
You are articulate, you are eloquent, and you are the carrier of earned skills, well-earned skills. I'll say I admire you. I admire your work, and I admire the intention that you have in your work.
Thank you.
I think you're very successful as a painter.
Thanks. Yeah. I always work at getting better, but
of course. I feel like I'm landing this plane, this conversation. Are there any things you want to say before we fade away?
Not that I can think of.
A little too on the spot there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we thank Andrew Judkins for joining us and for being a presence on our campus for a time in his work that was in the YFAC in the Yilvasaker Fine Arts Center Gallery. I encourage you to see his paintings anytime you can in person. That's the end of this episode of Whistle the Feast. Join us next time.
And that concludes this episode of Whistle the Feast. We hope you enjoyed being a part of the conversation as much as we did. Whistle the Feast would not be possible without all the creative people and spaces at Bethany Lutheran College. And you can head on over to blc.edu to learn more about the college or schedule a visit. If you have thoughts, questions, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. You can actually send any feedback about the show to feastreaders@gmail.com. And hey, if you've got a project you'd like to promote, we'd love to support it. Just send your details our way. A huge shout out to the wonderful people in our Bethany community for sharing their thoughts with us, and our producer Jaksyn Graham for managing the edits. And with that, I'm Nora Kratz alongside Jason Jaspersen, and we want to thank everyone who tuned into this episode of Whistle the Feast. Until next time.
Get curious, be of good service, and discover what God has given you.